Good morning, everybody. This is Pastor Sal from the Ridge. We're here, El Paso Strong, and we're getting ready to do our daily devotional that we've been doing right now with this workbook. Based on this workbook, I should say, Devotional Life in the Wesleyan Tradition. Again, it's a workbook that is mostly focused on um, the example of John Wesley. John Wesley was a Anglican priest in the 1700s, in the early 1700s, and he had started the Methodist movement back in that day. But that's not really what was so impressive about him. The thing that was impressive about him was that he really sought a devotional life, true devotional life, in not just devotional time. And so we want to use his examples and some of the things that he did over I think it was more than 65 years, really, almost 66 years worth of journals and writings and books and sermons and things that he wrote down and spoke about, that have been recorded about his life and how he led a devotional life. And so all this week, we've been talking about fasting and how different forms of fasting, why it's important to fast, and the nature of fasting. And so today, in day 4, we're going to be covering Wesley's personal example. So a personal example of how he fasted. Yesterday, we asked a question about, or we had a reflection about that fasting isn't just fasting from food. It can be fasting from, it could be social media, it could be from looking at websites that we shouldn't be looking at, doing bad habits that we shouldn't be doing. It could be television, it could be the computer, it could just be from trying to fast from saying anything negative, whatever. There's different forms of fasting. And so we learned a little bit about that. So today we're going to go into Wesley's personal example of his fasting and so how he used fasting in his life. So as we seek to develop spiritual disciplines, we need to look carefully at whose example we follow. And we must not feel compelled to follow another's practice in every detail. So in developing our spiritual disciplines we can look at other examples, but it doesn't mean that we have to follow their example to a T. You look at different examples, what different people did, and then maybe grab what works for you and come up with your own. And maybe you journal it, so that way, maybe in the future you can be the one that helps somebody else. Maybe your writings will be found by somebody or passed down to your family. Maybe your grandkids can look at that one day. Who knows? But it's a good thing to just have notated what you do. I have come to believe that John Wesley offers us a positive and realistic example regarding fasting, complete with a touch of humor in the matter. For the most part, he followed the custom of the Anglican Church, which encouraged fasting on Fridays during the 40 days of Lent, on the Ember Days, and on the Rogation Days. Between 1725 and 1738, when Wesley was conscientiously patterning his practices after the early church, he observed Wednesday and Friday as fast days. So during those 13 years, 1725 to 1738, he observed Wednesdays and Fridays. So he did, he saw an example of the Anglican Church or the early church or the older church, and then he took it from there and said, well, of course, me just paraphrasing or just my own thoughts about what he might have thought of, but said, well, I know the church wants us to fast on Fridays, but I'm going to do more than that, and I'm going to go Wednesdays and Fridays. So that was a personal choice of his. And that might be something that you decide to do. Who knows? But for those 13 years, he did that. Now, after 1738, however, he seemed to have returned to the weekly fasting on Friday. In short, Wesley was a good churchman, and he exhorted the early Methodists to be the same. Okay, so he instructed the early Methodists to do the same, and the churchgoers. So, it's important to fast, and it's just a part of your spiritual growth. It's a time that we dedicate to God, right? In whatever form we do it, whether you stay off of social media all day Friday, or all day during the day, or whether you don't drink alcohol. If you drink alcohol, maybe you don't drink alcohol all day Friday, and instead, that time that you would have been drinking alcohol, you spend it in scripture reading, or prayer, or talking to somebody about scripture or about prayer, whatever. I'm just using those examples because they're the things coming to my head, but not that you have to do that. And again, he was a good churchman, so he instructed people to do the same thing. Follows the examples of the church. They have some traditions and some things that they do that have been there for years and years, and for a reason, and they've been there for a reason. So don't completely X them out. Look into them, consider them. Maybe start thinking as to why they did this. They were started during an era where people were more focused on God. So I would say pay really close attention, because this generation and now is not as focused on God as it used to be. And which is why all these things are happening too. I strongly believe that. And so, although right now there's a lot of people that are actually Googling and doing searches for spirituality or answers to those questions, because they're not finding the answers where they normally find the answers. So they want to see more. So it's an opportunity for people to have conversation about scripture, about what does the Bible say about what we can do during this time, right? So we have to take on that, grab that opportunity. So using Fridays as an example, we can reconstruct the main features of Wesley's fasting. He began his fast following the evening meal on Thursday. This was related to a pattern of devotion related to Christ's passion. By initiating fasting on Thursday night, he was connecting with Christ's experience in the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay, what a wonderful example. Again, he did things in a very, um, he didn't just do things on a whim. He did them with some meaning behind them, and with some reason behind it. He didn't just say randomly, "Well, I'm going to do Thursday tonight just because." No, he wanted to use that as a symbolization of saying, this is the way I could participate in the Garden of Gethsemane, or as a remembrance of what happened that day, right? And he started after the Thursday evening meal. He started to fast from that moment. This was also the time when Wesley began to make special preparations to receive Holy Communion on Sunday. Again, a means of connecting with Christ's resurrection. Okay, so what could be an example for us of something like that? Well, I could say that maybe after you eat on Thursday evening, you spend some time in prayer as a symbol of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? Where he prayed that, he sweated drops of blood. We know all that, or at least we should know it. And so maybe that's a symbolization for us to prepare ourselves for when Sunday is going to be communion. This Sunday, most Methodist churches, or most churches that do communion, this will be the Sunday that they do it, the first Sunday of the month. So maybe we start tonight. Afterwards, maybe we fast. Not necessarily that you're not going to eat anything, but maybe you stay away from things that will distract you from getting your mind ready to receive the body and blood of Christ. Whether it's going to be drive-by communion, or whether you'll receive a blessing over the internet, of the whatever elements you have. In the Methodist Church, we have a tradition that's called a love feast. If you're not able to attend in person to receive the communion, you can get some banana bread and orange juice, and that's considered a love feast. Or you can have the bread and some bread and grape juice or just something else. But it's a form of, or you can even do the wafers, like the Roman Catholics have. We have some wafers here that are blessed, and some grape juice as well. And so it's just a way of you preparing yourself for that Sunday. Let's see here. Okay, so he prepared that as a way of doing that. Now, you can prepare yourself by maybe not doing social media, maybe not posting anything negative, maybe only focusing on things that are of Christ for those 3 days until Sunday, whatever. Um, whatever, however you would like. I mean, that's one way that we can practice that. Just an example. Now, usually he did not eat again until Friday afternoon when he broke fast with tea. Here is where I see a touch of humor in Wesley's example, even though he might not have seen it himself. By breaking fast with tea on Friday afternoon, he did not miss a single tea time during the week. After all, God may ask a Britisher to fast from some things, but never from tea. So that is pretty funny because, of course, we know that in Britain they have a time of tea, right? Wherever all the country stops what they're doing and they have tea time. So it's funny that he breaks the fast with tea, and so that at the same time he doesn't miss a tea time. So that is funny. Now, returning to the more serious and plausible note, by ending his fast on Friday afternoon, he was finishing his fast at the time when the Lord cried out, "It is finished." Okay, so even that, still, everything that he did was a symbolization or a way that he wanted to connect with something that Christ did, or something related to his resurrection or his passion. Um, he intentionally did things in a particular way. Now, he was using fasting as a means of participating in the grand story of redemption. So that kind of sums it up better than what I said. In this overall example, we must not forget that Wesley would take liquid during his regular fasting if it was necessary for his health. In his diary, we can see occasions when he drank water, tea, or broth during the time of fasting. This further highlighted his conviction that the main purpose of fasting was not abstinence and surely not mortification. That the main purpose of fasting was not abstinence and surely not mortification, but rather the consecration of additional time to be particularly devoted to God in prayer. So he didn't want it to be, and he never intended it to be, that fasting something that causes mortification or complete abstinenzation. Don't affect your health in order to fast. If you can fast, um, but keep in mind, if you're diabetic or if you have some other illness or you have cancer or some other thing, and you're not able to fast like a normal or a person, I wouldn't say normal, but a person that doesn't have an illness can. And so, and even some people that don't have any illnesses, it's very hard for them to fast more than, say, they can maybe skip one, maybe two meals, but to skip a whole day's worth of meals could be really hard on them. So again, it's not something that you just do on a whim. You prepare yourself for it. Maybe if you're one of those persons that gets hangry, that you have to have your 3 meals, or you're going to be angry and frustrated and with headaches or feel all weak and woozy. Maybe you start by only missing one meal, or instead of having your normal meal, say at 8 in the morning, your breakfast, maybe you try and stretch it out to 10 in the morning. And then maybe a couple weeks later, you stretch it to 11. And then a couple weeks later, you miss your whole breakfast altogether. And then now you go to lunch. So again, you ease into it. You got to know what your body is trying to tell you as well. Now, the impressiveness of Wesley's example is not so much in the details of each period of fasting as in the regularity and continuity of it. The fact is, he practiced weekly fasting for more than 60 years. Okay? He practiced it for more than 60 years. Okay? I don't even know if I can count 60 times that I fasted in my 48 years. You know, roughly maybe, and not even 48 years, but maybe 35 years that I've known what fasting is all about. Well, no, I've known it since I was like 5 or 6, because I knew that we weren't supposed to eat meat on Fridays during Lent. So I knew that was fasting. But so for 40 years or so, excuse me, I don't even know if I can count 60 times that I've done that. I'm pretty sure I have, but I wouldn't be able to recall, much less go 65 years, more than 65 years fasting weekly. That's amazing. Now, what that kind of time redeemed for additional prayer and devotion, we can better see why fasting is a true means of grace. So it's a way that we can participate in God's grace and participate in His passion and His death and resurrection. So again, it's just another way of a spiritual growth and for us to be stronger, especially during this time right now. We're fasting from a lot of things, whether we know it or not. We're fasting from social interaction. We're fasting from being able to be with people, say in a whole restaurant together, or gatherings, or being with family. We're fasting. So what are we doing during this time of fasting? It's forced fasting. I get that. But what are we doing with that time? What are we doing with that time? Food for thought. Now, reflecting and recording. Question number 1, what insights come in recognizing that Wesley followed the example and instruction of his church in matters of fasting? What role does tradition have in shaping our spiritual lives? Okay, again, what insights come in recognizing that Wesley followed examples and instruction of his church in matters of fasting? And he did, he practiced the Friday fasting. In the Anglican Church, it was recommended to fast on Fridays. It was kind of like we want you to fast on Fridays, but then there was times where he did Wednesdays and Fridays. There's times where he did fasting in other ways. And what role does tradition have in shaping our spiritual lives? Why is that important that tradition shape some of our spirituality? So, it could be that tradition is because it's things and practices that have been around for some time and that have worked for a lot of people. So they're there for a reason. Consider them. Take them into consideration. I'm not saying you have to always do them, but really look into why those traditions were made, or were done, and they're there for a reason. Put them, include them in some way in your part of your spiritual growth. Do you don't always have to do traditional things, but maybe just use a variation of it, or a basis. Number 2 is, what is a new thought for you to discover that Wesley of? I'm sorry. What is a new thought for you to discover that Wesley's example was related to Christ's passion? What light does this shed on other connections we might make between our spiritual formation and the life of Christ? Okay, so what of Wesley's examples did you like most, or that it's a new thought that provoked to you on his example of Christ's passion, that he used to use Thursday and Friday as a fasting to symbolize Christ at the Garden of Gethsemane, and then also that he finished his fast at the time that he said it is finished, and then that he used that from Thursday to Sunday to prepare his body for the receiving of the communion. Okay, as a kind of a symbolization of Christ's 3 days for resurrection. So, what new thought did it bring to you? And then what light does it shed on other connections we might make between our spiritual formation and the life of Christ? What other connections can that make for us? And how does it strengthen us in our life, our spiritual life with Christ? Okay. And then for your journaling thought, you want to journal, it says, if you know someone who is an Episcopalian, ask to see a copy of the Book of Common Prayer. So if you know of anybody that's Episcopalian, see if maybe they can lend you a Book of Common Prayer in case you don't have one of theirs. Examine what it instructs believers to do with respect to fasting today. Okay, so what does it say, and examine what does it instruct the believers to do in respect to fasting today? Write that down and then see how contemporary guidance relates to biblical and Wesleyan perspectives. Okay, so see how those perspectives kind of come together, or those guidances relate to each other, or does it relate to the example of Wesley? Okay, so that's our thoughts for today. Um, Again, these are really good examples of what Wesley used to do as far as fasting. I think fasting is very important. I think it's there's different ways to fast. It's more than just food. It's also what can you give up of this world or of your world and focus on God's world? Can we put it that way? Uh, I don't know, but what can you do? What can you give up for just a period of time? What can you give up that brings you pleasure? Or, I mean, other than reading scripture or praying, but what brings you pleasure? What takes some of your time? And can you put that aside and spend some time with our Creator, with our Redeemer, with the one that died on the cross for you and resurrected so that you would have life? I leave those thoughts with you today. Have a blessed day and God bless. We'll see you tomorrow for day 5.